Why does an ambulance stick around at an accident scene 10 men after loading victim? Everything from stabilizing care to information gathering. While we can do a lot of things while on the road, a lot of it is easier and safer when the ambulance isn't moving. If normal people understood the scope of practice paramedics have, they would be amazed. So much life-saving actually starts in the ambulance, and that is much easier to do when you're sitting still. They stabilize before moving. It can be normal. They would be performing initial procedures on the patient. It's possible they needed to stabilize them, get them in a position they cannot move and that may cause further harm while driving, etc. Most paramedics following the trauma stepwise approach. It's a structured assessment to find potentially life-threatening injuries such as massive bleeding, collapsed lungs, broken pelvis, etc. Part of doing this assessment is to expose and examine to find any wounds or injuries that aren't immediately visible. A bleed into your abdomen retroperitoneal can hold about 3 liters of blood, and the only sign can be some bruising around your umbilicus or sides. The body typically has about 5 liters total. As you can imagine, to expose and examine means cutting the clothes off the patient. We'd rather do that on the back of the ambulance instead of the street where everyone is watching. We then have to treat what injuries we find. That may be by giving drugs which need Roman IV access, or other procedures such as chest decompression or putting on traction splints. All this takes time, but may save the patient's life or at least keep them alive until a trauma surgeon can actually save their life. Some injuries require specialist treatment, so finding that injury before we set off is important. We may need to go to a different hospital, which may be in the opposite direction to the one that is closest, so setting off immediately could add time. One basic set of vital signs: blood pressure, ECG, BGL, etc. 2. Reassessment of injuries or medical problems. 3. Initiate and Roman IV access line if needed and give any needed drugs for any other treatments. Cardiac pacing, intubation, CPAP, pain control, bandaging. It takes time to do. 15 to 20 minutes if there's lots to do. And a lot of times doing these things are more important than just driving to the hospital with nothing done. They are stabilizing the patient, starting Roman IV, attaching monitors, etc., plus getting important medical info, etc. By doing this, the ER will know exactly what to expect. Plus blood has already been drawn, etc. In the old days, all the ambulance did was rush them there. Now it's a rolling ER and triage center, where much of the pre-treatment is done on scene. They stabilize the patient before getting going. An EMT friend of mine said if the ambulance loads the patient and right away runs, that is not a good sign. It is what they call the scoop and run, I think, meaning the patient cannot be stabilized on the field. Been in an ambulance before. I broke my arm 2 years ago and I was coherent, but still in shock, but no pain. They talk to you, asking how you are feeling and if you remember what happened, and they ask medications and allergies, then give you paperwork to sign. Then they hook you up to oxygen Roman IV, get your BP if you need any of that. They ask, of course. Then they strap you and make sure everything is good to go when you're off. The staff on the ambulance are medically trained. Their job is to stabilize the patient and then begin transport to the hospital. Medics and EMT do not get enough credit. Police and fire get all the attention. The ambulance medic in EMT field does far more than transport. My sister took a bottle of Klonopin to try and kill self, and I called 911. They were taking at least that long, and when I asked they said shift change. I said okay, but she really took all 90. Medical unit X 5 days then psych. They could be intubating and doing CPR. In my fortunately limited experience as an ambulance patient, it was due to the EMT starting in Roman IV and asking me a whole bunch of questions. I was mostly okay, but couldn't ride in a car because I possibly had a neck injury from falling, so it wasn't an every second count situation. The primary goal of paramedics is to stabilize the patient. Once that is done, they then transport the patient to the hospital where further care can be provided. It's not always the same. It won't be stationary if patient is critical, but they do have to stabilize them as much as possible. Then insurance. From my understanding, they have to go to the closest hospital. But I suppose if it's a big busy city and there are multiple, they have to decide based on factor like trauma level and available beds. I was in a wreck where I broke my wrist and bones in my foot. Once the guys got me in the ambulance, they were busy getting a splint on my arm, wrapping my foot, getting an Roman IV started for pain meds, and generally stabilizing my condition before they started driving. It usually helps to assess and treat the patient. Usually getting the patient stabilized, splinted perhaps, and Roman IV or an EKG or 1,000 other things they need to do before moving.